this topic with you guys. Um, so today we'll be talking about stress and anxiety, which is not such a great subject when it comes to our lives. And how I would like to basically design this talk is that first we have a look at what actually stress and anxiety is. And then we will have a look a bit into a coding of the brain and how brain codes different issues in us. And then we will have a look at three different techniques that you can use in your everyday life. And with these types of talks, it is that you will not basically use everything what I'm saying, but it's about picking up like little things that you can take and then make them work for you in your everyday life or in any situation you want. Um, so just to start, I would like to know something a bit more about myself and what makes me qualified to talk about this subject. So currently, I work as a cybersecurity consultant at WithSecure. I specialize in cloud apps and also in social engineering, and I'm looking into AI and connection with our brain and AI. But before that, I ran a hypnotherapy practice for 5 years in London, where I specialized in anxieties, fears, depression, confidence, and anything to do around these subjects. And I also have first-hand experience with anxiety and depression. So that was actually my first kind of step why I got into hypnotherapy, because I found it was the only thing that actually worked for me. And so I wanted to explore how the brain operates and how it actually creates issues. So it is more of a technical mind, and it's about trying to get rid of the stories that you built around your life and look more at the way how the brain actually operates. So subject anxiety and stress. So we really need to understand first like what actually anxiety and stress is to be. um, so stress and anxiety, they are in and in some way they are very different. And stress, it is a basically short-term event. It's always affected by environment. So stress will not start when you are in calm environment. It will always be reaction to a situation. Um, the difference between stress and anxiety in this kind of is that anxiety is persistent. It is trigger in your mind that keeps on being triggered over and over again. It basically becomes part of your coding. With stress, it is not as engraved, and it can be very short term or it can be long term as well. But it is not as persistent as anxiety. Um, when it comes to stress, someone once told me a really interesting thing that really stuck with me, that it's inability to deal with situation effectively, which in a way is true, because stress is basically a response to danger. But in our everyday life, we don't experience that much danger that would basically cause the death or demise of us. And generally, the stress is response to those situations. It's just about the brain not being able to evaluate the situation correctly. Therefore, it creates basically, therefore, it releases adrenaline so that we can fight, flight, or freeze, which is basically a response to danger. And it is a very, very powerful response, and it affects not only stress, but also is part of anxiety and pretty much most of the responses that we have to any kind of fear, danger, anything that our brain perceives as threat. And we will talk about fight, flight, and freeze a bit later on, because it's very important to understand it, because then you can start evaluating these responses in your life, and actually start responding to situations a bit better. Because I find if you understand what your mind is doing, it's the first step to starting to resolve it, because you actually know what you're dealing with. So therefore, I put a little bit of time to talk about these. So as we said, the stress is quite short term. It is response to situation. With anxiety, it is persistent, and also includes thinking about the future in quite negative light. So it's about also worrying about the future and about even future situations. So anxiety is a bit broader than response to the what's happening in front of you. It is response to triggers or to the code that is programmed in your brain. So when the code is triggered, the anxiety is triggered. Um, so I like to talk about basically brain as a bit of a computer because it uses quite similar language. It is far more vast than the programming we know it, but mostly in the tech community is a good kind of way how to visualize things. Also, before we move on, like one thing about anxiety is it is quite based on chemical imbalance in the brain. So some people are more prone to develop anxiety. Like when the you are more likely, or the brain is more likely to develop certain reactions to certain things. It all, but this kind of subject hasn't been researched fully, so it's sometimes quite difficult to medicate it or like use different drugs for these situations. They work, but it's always good to not only use drugs but also use therapy on top of it because that can actually help to get rid of the issue effectively. So let's move on. And I would like to now talk about quite interesting subject because which is coding of the brain. And as I said, like once you start understanding what you're doing, it's easier to deal with situations and to actually be a bit of your own therapist, or even like if you decide to go to seek a professional, it's easier for them to work with you because they actually understand what you are dealing with. Um, so I basically, what I did is trying to combine my knowledge of hacking and my knowledge of computers and knowledge of brain and think about it in a sense of a machine, of a tool that we can use or that we can actually hack and work with. So both technology and brain are using programming languages. So we know the programming languages of the computers. With the brain, it's either language or situations, and it's also coding that we are born with. Um, in tech, the code is written by humans, as we know. We are pretty much the gods of the machines, unless the AI takes over, but it's written by humans as well, so we can maybe look at it that way as well. And in the brain, the code is written by genes and by environment. So those are two primary things that basically create us, that create responses. They don't fully create us, but they create responses to situations. Now, I like to look at genes like pre-installed apps that we are born with, and these pre-installed triggers and codes that can be triggered in our life. They don't have to, but if they are being triggered over and over again, they come more on the top, and they become more of a primary code that the brain keeps on coming back to. Which is quite important to understand because you are not fully your reactions. You are basically the brain know better, and it keeps on going to the same code. And once and every code can be changed. The code written by genes is a bit more difficult to change because it's there since you were born. But everything is changeable within the brain because brain is very flexible and it can be worked with. It's just knowing how to work with, which we're gonna have a look at slightly later on. So if you look at the code is coded by genes, it's for example fear of spiders, fear of heights, because a lot of our ancestors were killed by spiders or fell off a cliff and they died. So the brain decided, oh, that's danger, code it in so that we don't keep on getting killed by these things. also need to belong is quite a primary coding, because, for example, in the we were in the tribes, when we were excluded of the tribe, there was a big chance of dying because the tribe is not there to protect you from animals and dangers. So that is one of the things that affects, for example, a lot our social life, and it is also quite interesting thing to be aware, because again it affects how you respond to different situations and situations in your life, and then these codes can basically create anxieties because that kind of primary code is not being met. Now, brain uses, in a very simplistic way, brain uses true and false evaluations. Those are basically triggers. Either the fear of spiders is true or it's false. Now, if you go to therapy, with fear of spiders, my only kind of goal is to turn this fear of spiders from 1 to 0. From you just need to turn it off. It's not as simple in the brain, like there are different stages turning true to false, but in a very simplified way, that's pretty much the goal, and that's you try to make the brain to do when you are actually using these kind of more technical techniques that I'm using. It's really about trying to communicate with that level of the brain that uh, starts accessing these. Um, Now, I would like to briefly look at just fight, flight, and freeze response, because it is very interesting response that creates a lot of issues in us and in our lives in general, in the workplace, in your personal life, because it's basically a response to fear. It's a response to danger. That's what gets triggered when anxiety is triggered. Basically, in any of these situations where we are under stress or a lot of pressure, or if we suffer from things like depression or anything that creates environment in our body that is this kind of stress environment, our limbic system takes over. And limbic system is basically very, very old system whose primary purpose is for you to survive. It doesn't care about your happiness. It doesn't care about anything else but survival. Like for limbic brain, if you are sad and broken but alive, it's okay because you're still alive. And I think this is the most important thing to understand, that there is like brain that actually doesn't care about your happiness. And that's where a lot of collision happens between the thinking brain, the brain that actually evaluates the world and says, oh, I want to be this way, I want to live this way. If I don't, I will not be happy. The limbic brain actually doesn't care. And if it starts taking over too much, there is collision. So I sometimes feel like in a way, therapist, it's like being intermediator between these two parts and trying to find a way how they can link together and actually work together, which is actually quite fascinating as well. And I believe that the concept of like body and mind, or the spirit and mind, can be linked to this kind of to this way how the brain responds to situations. So basically, our primary goal is to just use the limbic system when we are really in danger, like when there is, for example, some car driving towards us and we need to respond very. We don't need, like in that situation, thinking will kill you because thinking is way too slow. That's why the limbic system keeps on taking over. And if you are in the kind of situation when you are in prolonged anxiety, I don't know if it happened to you before, but you just don't think very clearly. You very often over dramatize. The kind of solutions that you come up with are sometimes very drastic, like very drastic. So it's quite important to understand that you are in basically a different state of mind, and the solution is to try to switch this side of the brain off so that the thinking brain takes over a bit more and you can deal with the situation. Now, to evaluate like what is your primary response, if it's fight, flight, or freeze, it's just enough to look into your life and to look at different situations, because you will have one of these that you will keep on coming to over and over again. Not in every situation, but in majority of situations, and it can really affect your life in a way of that you feel like you're making the right choice, but if you really looked at all the choices you have, it wouldn't be. It's just what your brain is learned to go to. So I like to use like relationships as a good example. So for example, if someone has a fight as their primary response, if they come across certain issues in relationships, they start either arguments or they really try to take action to well, either resolve or break the relationship, but just they are very active in the situations. The same at the workplace, like if someone is under stress and they have the kind of primary response, they try to tackle the problem. They try to solve the situation. They are not there passively. Like fight is very active way of response. Like a lot of people who have this kind of response, not a lot, those kinds of people, they can teach themselves how to turn the adrenaline from stress into like a driver. So like people who are workaholics who enjoy being under pressure, they basically use the adrenaline as a kick. It's also why people go like on the roller coasters or watch horror movies, because that also releases adrenaline. It as a their body basically uplifts that feeling into something exciting. um, so in this way, for some people stress is good. It can also be used for sports people or sportsmen who to focus, to get their body going and their mind going, and just to perform. Now, the problem with this, it's great if it's done correctly. If it's done incorrectly, it can put loads of stress on your physical side, because the body and the mind just feels like under attack all the time, and it will not respond to it immediately. But if it's prolonged over years, it will have effect. It can create anxieties, because prolonged stress, if it keeps on repeating over and over again, it eventually transforms into anxiety. It transforms into a code in your brain that becomes persistent. And I've seen this quite a lot, more often than I would like to see it. That if someone is being put through prolonged stress, or even like grief or any kind of difficult emotion, and if it keeps on going for too long, sometimes the body or the brain starts connecting different don't make any sense, which is quite interesting because the brain is so interconnected, and sometimes it just creates connections that logically don't make sense. Like for example, I had people suddenly not being able to go into the tube, or not being able to eat in public, or just having very irrational fears. And in this sense, approach is good because you don't really think about it logically. You just go and try to find the inception of the problem. So therefore, I find that these kind of states of stressful situation, even anxiety, they are very dangerous if they are not treated properly, and if the person is really suffering from it, because they expand. The brain just starts expanding them into different areas. And or there is another example which I more often than the body just shuts down. The person keeps on operating. One day they just cannot get up. They have to sleep like 20 hours a day. They are very weak. The body totally shuts down. It's like, no, I'm not dealing with this. I've been doing this for too long. We have to just stop. And so therefore it's good to observe yourself and how well you cope with these situations, because then it's easier to deal with it when the problem, rather than when it escalates to something so much bigger. But I a bit went on a tangent So we were talking about fight, flight, or freeze. So we described the fight, which is very active response. The flight, it's the opposite. You just run away. You run away from the situation. So those are people who, when something gets really, when the relationship starts getting hard, they just quit them. They just exit. It's also in the workplace. You try to avoid dealing with the problem, or it is very painful to deal with the problem. You rather just want to go and do something else, or it's just about avoiding certain tasks. Now the freeze, it's like play dead. Um, for example, in relationships, like if someone has this as their primary response, and they are in like some kind of abusive or really bad relationship, they tend to stay there for long because they just freeze. They just like in a state of I cannot do anything. And the same it is like in the workplace. Uh, if you are faced with some stressful situation, you just I don't know what to do. You just panic. It's like this state of not knowing what to do in that situation. And if you start evaluating it in your life and see what is your primary response, you can then ask yourself, is this the response that I want? Do I want to respond differently? And then teaching your brain how to respond differently, because even like analyzing things, that takes that kind of power out of them, and it's easier to start introducing the kind of solutions in the moment after it happens, when you are in a calm state. So I just wanted to talk about this fight, flight, or freeze response, because it can do quite a lot of good once you analyze it properly and start evaluating it in your life. But now let's go and have a look at some techniques that you can use. And these are the techniques that I use mostly with my clients, that I find like that worked a lot, and can like this is basically a blueprint of the techniques. Everyone can develop them slightly differently, and this is really about finding your own way how to use them and finding your favorite one and use it, because you cannot do everything, and it's always about just doing little than too much. um, because I'm finding that it's always the simple things in therapy that makes all the difference. It's always something really, really stripped down and very simple that person keeps on repeating in their life, and that makes part of their life. So the first one, I called it open eyes awareness. It's also called open eyes meditation, but I didn't want to really use the meditation here because it has such a spiritual sound to it. And for people who are not spiritual, they might be asked, "Who I'm asked to meditate?" No, you're not. You don't have to close your eyes and try to get rid of your thoughts. This is basically actually the first step that you should be doing. Like if you're trying to get into meditation practice, which is not really closing your eyes and trying to think about nothing. It's about trying to first get control over your thoughts. This is exactly the technique that should do it. It should help you to understand how to basically shut down the thoughts, and how to basically take brain for even a brief moment, because it makes a lot of difference. Now, the main kind of premise underneath this technique is that you cannot be inside your head and outside at the same time. Now, every issue, every anxiety, every stress response happens inside you. It doesn't happen outside. Outside world is completely neutral. Um, and it is about getting yourself from the inner world to the outside world. So you terminate a pattern of any form of stress or anxiety that is running inside you, or anything else that you want to terminate. It is about terminating a pattern, because everything in your mind has a beginning, middle, and an end, and it very often runs the same way. And if you intervene what your brain is doing at some point, the brain is quite interesting thing. It's not like a dictator. Brain likes to cooperate. It's a bit like a child, um, and you need to make it interested. If the brain is interested in you actually trying to communicate with it in its own language, it will start responding. It will give you, it will start amending the connections in your mind. It's just about knowing how to communicate with it. Communication is not by human language. Human language is something like an interpreter. It is not the direct way how to connect to the mind. Like the hypnotic language is, but it's a different type of language. It's basically designed around brain and around the hooks that the brain gives you. But that's a bit of a intermediate subject, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I just wanted to explain you like why this technique is so important, because once you once you break the pattern, the pattern, and so what I wrote the technique down here so that if you want to read it in your own time or take a screen grab or remember it, it's very simple. It's basically about just paying attention to anything what's around you. It's about being like someone who came to this world for the first time, or someone who really doesn't know, and being really fascinated by anything around you, any object, any people, nature, whatever it is, whatever that you are drawn to, it doesn't matter. And it's about just noticing everything and anything about that object, about your surroundings, because you will find out that there is so many things you never noticed, even if it's in your own room, in the place where you are every day. And it's just a few seconds to ask yourself, oh, what colors are those? What's the nature of the object? um, if you are outside, what the person is wearing, what's the color? Just keep on being really inquisitive about the world around you. It's not about making a story about it. It's not about like seeing someone with some coat and being, oh, my father used to wear this coat, and going back to the daydreaming about your father. No, you don't want to be inside your head. You just want to be with the world out there. Just keeps on noticing, just making your eyes a primary thing that keeps on giving you these kind of impulses and noticing them. Because what it does, like you will, once you start doing it, you will feel this kind of lightness in your body very quickly, because you are actually shutting down the voice in your head that keeps on running. Once you are good at it, you can do it without even talking to yourself about things, just noticing. And it is actually quite powerful way how to start shutting down your thoughts for quite a long amount of time. It just needs to be trained. So I would never recommend to use this technique for the first time when you are actually suffering through stress and anxiety, because you are already in very difficult situation. It's like, in sports, you don't go into a match before you train. So I would recommend just playing with this technique and finding what works for you and doing it in situations when you are fine. Like, for example, when you start daydreaming in your head and you for example start thinking about, oh, like shopping list, what you need to do, what you need to buy. There is like what happens a lot in London, someone in front of you walking very slowly. You feel like, oh, you just feel a bit irritated about it. You don't want to feel irritated. Just see what it does to you, see how your body responds. It's about you actually understanding how your body responds. And once you do, you can start using this technique in those situations where you just need your thinking brain to kick in again. So if you are in some stressful situation, taking like a minute to do this, to go somewhere else, to really be engaged with the world around you, and then you will find that your brain starts calming down, and you will be able to find better solutions to what you are dealing with. So it's basically about giving you control, starting to give you control over your brain and telling the brain, no, I don't want to feel this way. Let's figure out a better way how to deal with this. It's a conversation. It doesn't happen immediately, but if you buy into it, I promise you, like, this is one of the most powerful things that I find that worked for my clients when I was starting with them, dealing with anxieties and things like that. Okay, let's have a look at the other technique, which I called anxiety. And this one technique is basically playing a bit of a games with your brain, with your mind. And the mind actually likes playing games. Like if you interact with it, if you start approaching it in this way, how to get rid of certain things and certain feelings, fears, whatever it is that you want to get rid of. Now, this is about using imagination, because imagination is actually the most powerful tool to interact with our brain, and using it to actually help your body, help your mind to understand what you want. And so this technique is very simple. It's about when you are in any state of stress, any state of fear, or kind of state that is different from the state of when you are okay, when you feel calm, when you feel happy. It's about identifying where in your body that feeling lies, that feeling of stress, because as you know, you will feel differently. So there will be some difference between those two states. It's just about identifying where in your body that pressure is. Is it in your mind? Is it in your chest? It will be somewhere. It's just about giving the place to it where it lives. And once you do, you suddenly tell the brain, this is what this is what we're dealing with. And then it's just about asking yourself, if this kind of feeling that I have, if this thing inside me was an object, a color, a person, an animal, or whatever it would be, what would it be to me? Most people visualize, some people don't, some people just know, oh, this is this. Some people even hear sound. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just about identifying something that you can connect to that feeling, because then you make it tangible. You make it, you can visualize it, you know what it is. And the brain knows what it is, and it creates the hook. It suddenly knows, oh, okay, this is what we're dealing with. Fine, let's do this. And then it's just about asking yourself, like, if this object, for example, you identify it as a feeling of stress inside your chest, it's a black ball. It's a heavy black ball, doesn't make you feel good. Now, if that object, if you were to change it into something positive, something very different to this, what would it be? You know, some people change it to a cloud, to a fluffy cloud. Some make it some nice, shiny, light ball. It really doesn't matter. Some people even blow it, you know. They decide for a more destructive way and they just smash it with a hammer or whatever. Whatever you do, it doesn't matter. It's really up to you. That action of changing that object, you will start feeling that you know that feeling in your body is disappearing, and also you will feel that you suddenly have something that you can come back to. That positive object will be will be hooked by your brain to the positive kind of feeling. So you can use this exercise over and over again, and what will happen eventually, just thinking about that object or that thing or that whatever it is, that positive thing that you change it into, will give you the positive feeling. Some people even go as far as finding something in the outside world that reminds them of that object, like a stone or a toy or anything, and they just have it on them, and when they look at it, it helps the mind to understand, okay, we are releasing this feeling. And again, it is a very technical way. It really doesn't look at the beginning or the kind of inception of the problem. It just tries to make it go, like make it, give it not so much power. So basically this technique gives people space to actually feel better and start dealing with the situation in more strategic and more kind of effective way. Perfect. So this is our second technique. The third technique is just a bit of taster of a bit more advanced technique, what we generally do in therapy. This is more about analyzing what is going on in the situation. This is about finding the primary trigger of what lies underneath, what the brain actually is responding to. And once you know it, knowing is half of the problem being solved, because you know what you're dealing with. And this is about evaluating for situations, for example, or anxiety, and finding the limiting beliefs that actually, like a ladder, lead you to that primary kind of code that governs everything. Um, so it's easier to give you an example of what I mean. So basically, I looked at a situation at work. You know, you are really overwhelmed. You're not happy with the job. It makes you really stressed. It makes you um, it really makes your life quite miserable. Now, the most easiest solution, just quit the job, just away from the situation. But now you can't do it. So what is the problem? Because that's very valid solution and the easiest. Uh, so you basically look at limiting beliefs that are behind you not being able to deal with the situation. So for example, if you look at the solution, quit the job, and you can't do it. So we are just going to ask, what does it mean questions. So if you can't quit the job, so what does it mean if you quit your job? And someone would say, oh, I cannot find another job because I'm not good enough. Okay, so what does it mean if I can't find another job? Oh, I will not have income and I can't pay my rent. So you just ask, what does it mean if you don't have an income and can't pay your rent? Oh, I will end up on the street and I'm going to die. You know, that is quite drastic. But with these kind of situations, when you feel stuck, you will start going down lower and lower the ladder, that you sometimes encounter beliefs that are really out there, that you start finding to do with reality. They are very, very extreme. So in this situation, if someone tells you, oh, I'm going to be homeless, I'm going to die, it's basically survival. The brain hooks that job directly to survival. If you lose the job, you're going to be dead. If you say it like this, you probably feel like that it's not true, because you're not going to be dead if you lose the job, but the brain thinks you will. And this is the problem with mind. It doesn't live in the world around us. It creates different connections between different triggers, different codes, and it just runs them. It just runs those connections. So here, if your connection is job equals survival, well, it's very difficult to even deal with the situations in the job, because you're scared that you're going to get fired if you do something, if you speak up. If you quit the job, you're definitely going to die. That's what the brain thinks. So it's just about dealing with that and knowing that, okay, this is the connection, fine. Once you know it, it's easier to deal with it. It's then about, okay, what kind of solutions can we find around this? What kind of solutions about these limiting beliefs we can find? If the first limiting belief is I can't find work because I'm not good enough, then thinking that you are not good enough is quite important thing to deal with, because once that's solved, you actually have more confidence to deal with the situation and find a new job. So this is basically just a technique, like when you feel good after the situation, just trying to analyze those limiting beliefs and asking about, oh, what does this mean if this limiting belief comes true? So these are basically the techniques that I find are used quite widely with my clients, and they generally worked. It's about finding what works for you. If you're a more analytical person, finding a trigger where will work better than, for example, the open eye meditation. But it's just about trying things and playing with your mind, because this form of therapy is a bit more playful and inquisitive, rather than talking about your childhood and everything what happened and how horrible the world is, because those are just stories. They are just evaluate the situation in a very wrong way, because as we know, we live in our own bubbles, and that's how they are triggered by thinking badly about the world, about the past, about the future. And underneath all of that are just triggers and limiting beliefs, and the way the brain evaluates situation. And if you don't tell it to evaluate it differently, to change the code, it keep on running it. It's like with the programs, like unless you rewrite the code will not do something else. It might break, it might create a lot of issues, but unless you intervene, like, that's it. You will not get anything better out of it. So I hope that this talk helped you to understand your mind a bit better, and um, hopefully you can take something out of it that you can use in your everyday life. And now it's a bit of a question time. If anyone has any questions, I put there my LinkedIn account. If anyone wants to connect, you can. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can always contact me there, and we can talk about anything what we've talked about in this talk. And yeah, so I would like to ask, are there any questions?
Any questions from the audience? Okay, I have not a question, but
Mm-hmm.
something very, you know, I quite like the way you explained the working of the brain process and how it deals with anxiety and stress in a very technical way.
Mm,
So I could relate it to so everything I do at work or wherever.
yeah.
So it just gave me an idea that yeah, everything can be coped up and we can train the brain to deal with the
Mm,
anxiety and stress in a way, but all it needs the practice. So the tips that you have provided, they're really helpful, and I'm
ah,
definitely gonna implement them.
I'm very glad. Yes, I find it like for technical people who work in technical profession is a very good way to explain it on the code, because that's pretty much how the computers came up to being. They are actually mimicking the workings of the brain in a more primitive way. um, I don't know whoever created like started with these creations, if they used the brain consciously or subconsciously as a blueprint, but you can find so many similarities in the way we actually perceive coding and computers and the brain.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm sure
Perfect.
the attendees will have more comments and questions for you once we publish the videos on
Perfect.
the YouTube channel. So, thank you so much for joining us today, and
Thank
thanks for
you.
bringing up this interesting talk.
Amazing. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, and everyone have a lovely day.
you too. Bye.
Cool.
Thanks
Thank you. Bye
everyone for
bye.
joining.